Greetings, travelers. I am, in fact, the most notorious mediocre Scholar player on the planet. It has come to my attention that Scholar hating is now popular again, and I can't help but think that I was mostly responsible for that by taking a big fat dump on this job previously. So before I once again explain why you have to be a masochist to play this job, allow me to first start by saying that Scholar was in fact buff since the last time I made a video directly talking about it. It is not weak. I have also stopped using it to heal in Savage in favor of playing Astrologian, because I am not a healer main, and I simply play healer to fill in. This is once again not because Scholar is weak. If you want to know what the meta is, it's Astro and Scholar. For everything. Sorry, White Mage, you're the unique cool kids healer yet again. With my position established, Endwalker is coming out and Scholar is stated to not be getting any significant gameplay changes. This is what provoked the masses even more, causing an outpour of people asking why, and feeling like they have been neglected yet again. Although you will hear some people come out of the woodwork and say, Scholar is perfectly fine, it doesn't need to be changed. And I have a name for these people, it's called delusional. So allow me to tell you all the reasons why I personally hate this job, despite my undying love for it. This is just my opinion on things as usual, but I guarantee that you will find something in this rant that you can relate to. Oh wait, hold on. This is me that we're talking about. Of course, I'm always right. Now, when people talk about this job, once again, no one is talking about viability. I'm only gonna stress this again. Scholar is viable. Fucking turbo viable. The best healer in the game. Super busted. Does more damage than fucking Black Mage. That doesn't mean that I enjoy playing it. So I'm going to give you a small glimpse with less memes and more sarcasm. Alright, where do I start? I'll give an example. Dissipation. You ever look at this button? What does it do? You eat your fairy and gain 3 stacks of ether flow, which you can spend on off GCD heals. It also buffs the potency of healing magic by 20%. Now, if you haven't heard me go absolutely fucking ballistic in the past, take a wild guess at what that phrasing means. That's right, it doesn't buff off GCD heals, only GCD healing. There is no fucking way you thought this button worked this way at first, considering the aether flow it gives you can only be spent on off GCD heals. It seems like a bug. In practice, this button on Scholar after all of the changes is just used to spend ether flow on energy drain purely for movement tech. That's it. It doesn't even synergize with itself. But wait, there's more. When you eat your fairy, you also lock yourself out of all of these skills for its duration. So you have to plan to make sure that if you do eat your fairy that you're not going to want any of these buttons for the next 30 seconds. Now, I don't think there is anything wrong with the job being punishing to play, but if you play any other healer in the game, this just doesn't happen. Just imagine pressing Neutral Sect on Astrologian and having a bunch of buttons taken away. You'd get a little tilted and possibly a little confused. And this brings up the first big problem with Scholar, anti-synergy. It's a job with a bunch of skills which in isolation are pretty good, but don't make a whole lot of sense together. Think of a bunch of different melodies, which all sound good, except they're all a half step off from each other in key, so when you put it all together, it sounds like you're just mashing your hand on the piano. And that's Scholar. I could go through a list, so I will. Seraph locks you out from Aether Pact, and by proxy locks you out from using your fairy gauge. Dissipation gives you a resource that also lets you gain the fairy gauge, but because your fairy is being digested in your stomach, it cannot gain that resource. Awesome. If you use your fairy gauge to tether someone and start giving them regen, it will go away if you use any of your other fairy skills and resets it again. Imagine pressing regen on a target and then using an AoE heal and it takes away the regen and you have to reapply it. And that's just a short list of some of the anti-synergistic parts of this job. I wouldn't call anything by itself here a deal breaker, but you do have to deal with all of it. But hold on, anti-synergy is only one problem that Scholar has. How about pet jank? Have you ever played a video game and thought to yourself, God damn it, I pressed a button and my attack came out? I really wish I could make this less responsive. Well, that's a feature of playing Scholar, clicking a pet action and having the pet decide when it's going to use it. On a healer. It's not like you would ever want to snapshot a regen at a specific time or your other mitigation and heal buff skill. Why would anyone want it to work that way? Well, as a fun fact, did you know that Seraph used to come out and you were immediately able to press Constellation and have it all work, and that was considered a bug, so they made sure to add the pet delay into it? absolutely lovely. People come out of the woodwork and always tell me that Scholar used to be even more janky back in the day, and I go, gee willikers, I am so glad that I only got punched in the nuts instead of having them ripped off. What an improvement. Thank God I have to manually press Consolation as well and try not to ghost them before the fairy goes away. I love pressing Ruin 2 more just to be able to weave. Even better, you have to make sure that you don't ghost any of your other fairy actions by either eating your fairy or transforming your fairy around the time that you use certain skills. If you moved your fairy to the center of the arena, you also have to manually move it back after you eat it, you dumb fuck. At least Scholar makes up for this by the pixie having a cast time to resummon it. To say the least, Scholar has a bunch of annoying micromanagement when it comes to pets, which is still less than what this job has had to deal with in previous expansions, but in a similar vein, it's not something that other healers have to deal with. You want to know something else that doesn't make any sense? Aetherflow itself and good old energy drain. So you can spend Aetherflow on off GCD heals, or you can gain DPS and mana by using Energy Drain. Blah blah, Broil is 290 potency and Ruin 2 is 200 and Energy Drain is 100, so using Ruin 2 and weaving Energy Drain is a gain of 10 potency over Broil. Blah blah, math is hard. Except this isn't really true, because if you use Ruin 2 and weave a heal, that's like 90 to 100 potency loss depending on your perspective. I'm sure this really stimulates some people with the idea of one of the healers getting a DPS loss for using its off GCD heals. But it does seem to go against the very principle of beginning to optimize your healing. You see, other healers in this game want to press their GCD heals as little as possible while maximizing off GCD healing for better DPS. Scholar, on the other hand, is contrary to this because it doesn't want to heal ever to maximize its damage. That's a really good incentive. Thankfully, this is all going to be helped in Endwalker with Broil having its cast time reduced, which is something that is actually positive. So using something like Fey Illumination or Aether Pact is not going to feel as terrible. However, as long as Energy Drain exists in its current form, spending Aetherflow will always be viewed as throwing damage into the trash. I think we can all understand why the dev team has tried so hard and so often to remove that godforsaken button. Of course, if they do decide to do something like that, you will have to rework the entire MP economy of the job. It's not like they did that for a different healer in the past. Actually, while I am implying that I am talking about Astrologian, let's take a look at the other current shield healer for a brief moment, Nocturnal Sect Astro. Aspected Helios, 800 MP, 200 cure potency, and 125% of healing as a shield, versus Scholar's Suck, or, after multiple MP cost nerfs, 1000 MP, 180 cure potency, and 125% of healing as a shield. Now I'm sure any actual Scholar player is about to say it, so I will say it for you. Why the fuck would you ever click that button? Exactly. Why would I ever click the shield button on a supposed shield healer? I should clarify, this isn't exactly the best kind of comparison because you can't really compare jobs with one ability directly next to each other in isolation, but this is just funny to point out. Now that I am done talking about the other shield healer which is being removed from the game, let's go into my next topic. What in the world is Scholar's identity? A shield healer? That seems pretty funny when the only actual shield buttons are Adlo, Sugma, Deployment Tactics, and Consolation. Yes, it has 4 buttons that give you an actual shield, 2 of which have enormous recast times, and one of those requires another spell to do anything. Deployment Tactics is also clunky, and don't think I forgot about that. Now, in terms of mitigation, you do also have the real big boy spell like Sacred Soil and Fey Illumination, but Scholar has never and still doesn't feel entirely mitigation focused, just that it has a little more mitigation than the other healers. I'd say it's kind of more like a jack of all trades, more focused on some mits and some regens, Sacred Soil, considering that the fairy just applies a passive regen and all the skills in general just kind of do everything. Except, of course, apply a bunch of raw healing bursts consistently. It can do that, just not all the time. So who really knows what its identity is, but a shield healer seems a little bit off from that. But this also kind of brings me to Scholar's playstyle. If you ever ask a Scholar player what they do with their job, it's either going to sound like you're talking to a conspiracy theorist who's been up for 5 days straight, or a greasy couch potato who can't get up to go get the remote. If you asked an Astro what they do on Junction Shiva and E12S, they might give you something that sounds almost straightforward. A Scholar player, on the other hand, doesn't have just a single button that they can click to deal with every situation, Sacred Soil. You might have to click a couple of buttons to deal with a given problem. Or a lot of buttons, or even more buttons. It's either that, or they just make the other healer deal with all of that shit. So it can kind of be like coming up with a bunch of different formulas to figure out the same problem, which is cool, or just shoving responsibility onto your co-healer. There is no in between. Hold on, I'm almost sounding specific with where I'm directing my anger. So let me talk about clunkiness really quick. I already mentioned deployment tactics being clunky because you have to be sure that the server is confident that you have the shield down before you try to spread it. But what about another fun skill like excogitation, which is an off GCD heal with a potency of 800. Keep that number in mind. You give the target a buff, and if they drop below 50% health, it pops and it heals them. So, if the damage that you would take would outright kill you, Excog is just going to look at that target and say, what, was I supposed to do something about that? And if you drop to, say, 51% health, it doesn't pop either. So if you put these two together, it is entirely possible to have a scenario where a tank buster hits multiple times, you expect it to pop Excog on the first hit, it doesn't, and the tank dies to the second hit. And you now once again wonder why you play this godforsaken job. You get to jump through all these hoops for what? A cure potency 800 single target off GCD heal? Or you could play Astro with Essential Dignity that can heal upwards to 1100 potency with no downside, or play White Mage with Tetragrammaton that heals for 700 and also just works. Anyways, if you wanted me to give you an easy fix for this, if you let the Scholar manually detonate Excog if they want to, you're good to go. This would solve one of the edge cases while still letting it kill people if they would die from 100 to 0, and it would make it feel a little bit better, while still being kind of a piece of shit, just like Scholar should be. And that's probably everything I'm going to be complaining about right now in this video. So what in the world is Scholar's problem? Nothing, but also everything. There isn't going to be a single thing that clearly causes the most grief. It's a culmination of a million annoyances, like a swarm of mosquitoes. One bug bite isn't going to make you too upset, probably, but getting like 100 of them really starts to add up. So, what do people like about Scholar? Well, you get to plan things out, and it also does big damage and gives your team a DPS buff, although you have to pre-plan your heals on all healers if you want to be good at it. Also Sacred Soil. Scholar also feels super good in dungeons thanks to Art of War being instant cast and also being a gain on 2. Many skills like Excog and Aether Pact feel awesome until you start running crazier stuff when they might not feel as impactful and start to feel more like a nuisance. Also, you can get a really big fucking shield when you actually crit on Adlo. I would argue that many of his skills are extremely strong despite the clunkiness, while the weakest parts of the kit are ironically the shielding aspects, which can also make this job feel like there is a disconnect between how the developers think the job should be played versus how it is played in practice. But if there is one thing that I can say about this job, it is uniquely punishing to play, which is why the only people who play it are going to be gluttons for punishment. It is why there is such a strong divide between Scholar players who actively play the job and those who've abandoned it. I'm not going to end this off just yet because here's what I can say. Maybe Dissipation could buff all healing, but maybe it's time to just get rid of fairy eating. Maybe Scholars just need to go vegan. It's not impossible to live without it, and it's very clunky in its current state. Maybe it's time to make Energy Drain give Ether Flow like Summoner, and not make off GCD healing feel like it cuts into your DPS. It's not like overriding an Ether Flow stack is automatically going to be awful in the absence of Energy Drain. And having 3 charges every minute to use on specific spells can still keep its identity of requiring some planning. Or maybe the simple change to Broyle's cast time is going to be enough to make Scholar feel more satisfying, and getting another mitigation tool that increases move speed is a very strong skill in concept, unless we start getting a bunch of forced march mechanics that are also raid-wides in Savage. All I can say moving forward is this. Even if Scholar comes out next expansion and it doesn't feel super good, they have released reworks in the middle of expansions before, and the last 3 of them have been pretty alright. Scholar is going to be fine. Eventually. But it's not like any of us are playing it in Endwalker currently. The biggest mistake that I think was made was the marketing. Although they did say they were trying to remove pet jank, so maybe there's going to be even less annoyances on release. It's okay to be pessimistic about the changes, and if it turns out that the job is poorly received, it will probably move up on the priority list. Scholar might be a lot of things, but being weak isn't one of them. It just sticks out for being so much more particular than everything else in the game currently, appealing to the people who want that type of experience, or for those who just want to shove more responsibility on their co-healer. Now let's get out there, and once again, just play a different healer if you don't like it so much. Nothing is making you play Scholar only. You have other choices. Why does everyone insist on playing one job? If only there was a way to fucking play multiple jobs on one character in this fucking game.